This is To Lead is to Learn. In this very special episode, we will be talking to a real-life leader about their experiences of leadership and any thoughts and visions for the future. On today's episode, got a good broad discussion there.
I'm a bit of a workaholic. Really struggled. It was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Well, that's a really difficult question. That's the most challenging part of leadership. Bearing in mind we've all got lots of other things going on in our lives. I think a leader's always got to be looking at the next step, but it's got to know the timing of when that next step should be done. Got a lot of what I hope is my legacy. I'd hate for us to be doing the same all the time. If you don't love it, then you shouldn't be doing it.
Without further ado, here is Julie Derrick, the CEO of Valley Invicta Academies Trust. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Julie Derrick and I'm CEO of Valley Invicta Academies Trust.
The first question that I have is, you've had a distinguished career within education and you've progressed all the way from the classroom teacher up to CEO of the trust. Can you give a summary of your career path that led you towards that?
It's an interesting one on the basis that if you'd said to me when I first started my career, I would never have dreamt of being anything other than a classroom teacher. That was my ultimate, what I wanted to do. And I think it's about probably being in the right place at the right time. So I started off as a design and technology teacher and really enjoyed what I did. Thoroughly enjoyed the problem solving element of that and equally loved being with people and line managing people in a very different way. And I was in a school, a local secondary school to here actually, and the head at the time needed somebody to teach a bit of business studies. They had a vacancy because of somebody being absent, normal type of scenario that we get in teaching. And he asked if I would help out. I had a degree in business and economics, so that obviously made good sense to do it. And I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a go. But I wasn't really wanting to do it unless I had the training. So I went back to university and did more training in order to make sure that I was skilled enough to do that. And eventually took on the role as a temporary position, then became lead teacher, and then before I knew it, I was applying for an advanced skills teacher role, which was a way of sharing best practice. And I, at the time, in applying to be an advanced skills teacher, really wanted to apply for it because I wanted leadership opportunity, but wanted to stay in the classroom. So if you look now at what I'm doing, it's in complete contrast, but actually it put me in a good position and gave me some really wonderful experiences whereby I worked with other colleagues in other schools and really got an insight into what good school leadership was about. Then, interestingly, I got to the point whereby my own daughters were looking at their education and 11 plus, and I visited a couple of grammar schools, one of which was Invicta Grammar School. I was desperate to work there. Just saw the facilities, saw what the school stood for, and thought I really would like to be part of that school. So as and when a vacancy came about, I applied for that. And here I am now. I was head of business studies, head of business and enterprise, and have again been in the right place at the right time. Was asked to do a temporary assistant head post, then on to deputy, and then on to head of school. Obviously, going back before then, I did a number of teaching jobs in other schools. I did my very first placement, which was up in London at St John Cass Academy, the East End of London, which was a tough school. did another one in Catford, where I worked in Catford, and then in Ruton School. So bit by bit, I've sort of gone from London to working in Kent. And I think that insight has given me a really good understanding of both selective and non-selective education, which I absolutely feel has made me understand what good education looks like, because I believe you can have both. And I believe it's important to give children, no matter where they are, in whether it's the middle of London, whether it's in Scotland, or as indeed we are in Kent, the very best education they can. It's something that I hold on to very, very dearly. I absolutely loved the leadership element of my business and enterprise. That gave me an insight into how you can bring education or the world, the outside world of education, into the classroom. And I think that's what I've tried to do in everything I've done since, both in my leadership and in my classroom practice. And I think you can do that very ably now with the facilities and the resources that most schools provide. So it's been an interesting journey, but it's been one that's, I think, not necessarily sought by me, but by people seeing where I am and what I can do. And I think I'm trying to do that in my own practice now as a CEO. I like to spot talent, and I like to be able to say and to those individuals and to nurture that talent and move that forward, which is what good teachers do.
You said in there, interestingly, that you were given the opportunity to take on an assistant head role at the time. Who was it who spotted you and potentially pushed you towards that?
I think it's a combination, to be honest. I think that you're given some opportunities in leadership, and it's about making those links and working with others. And you've almost got a mentor, whether that's a line manager or somebody else. And I can remember, and it was an assistant head at the time, Mary Chippendale, and she worked really, really hard with me on the basis of just checking in that I was okay with what I was doing, and I had a vision and that I was following through that vision. But most importantly, checking in that I had the support that I needed. And I'm very, eternally grateful to her for what she did. But there are other people along the way, on the basis of heads that you've worked for. When I was working at Aylesford Secondary School, I had the most fantastic head teacher who really taught me about the importance of walking a school, talking to your staff, talking to your students, being there for your parents. And you see that best practice and you think, actually, that's the sort of head you want to be. So there are those sorts of figures, aren't there, in anybody's career that you learn from and you think, actually, yes, I want to pick up the best practice that you're showing me and modelling on a day-to-day basis. In the same way as a teacher does that in the classroom.
Yeah.
I also think I had a CEO who equally let me run with a lot of ideas when I became head of Invicta, and he absolutely understood the need for me to take personal risks in changing the curriculum, changing staffing patterns, and everything that again linked to us further improving Invicta. And he gave you that freedom to do that, but he also gave you the reassurance and that ability just to check in on the basis, have you thought about this or have you thought about that? And for that, I'm very, very grateful.
That leads me on to my second main question. You're a leader which I personally look up to. What values do you hold personally which you think those who are around you buy into and they kind of resonate with and follow you because of that? So what values do you put into your leadership?
I think number one, and interestingly it's one that I have built into the core trust values, and that is integrity. I think, we can all make mistakes. If somebody tells me that, something's gone wrong for whatever reason, we'll deal with it. And I think that open, honest approach to the way we work is absolutely critical, because then we can support and work together to find a solution. So integrity is absolutely number one. The other element to it, I think, for me, is building relationships and being personable and being that person that's got an open door policy, whereby you're not leading by fear, but you're leading by rolling your sleeves up and working alongside everybody. And an element of pragmatism, because we all want blue sky thinking, we all want to achieve wonderful work things in the world, but I think there's also, it's really, really important to think what realistically can be achieved in the timescales that you've got, bearing in mind we've all got lots of other things going on in our lives, and I hope that's what people would see me for.
How would you go about making sure that that's what you portray to people then, if they're the three key ones that you want to display?
I think it is about demonstrating that you yourself can make mistakes. And I think, I've done that in my career, whereby I've stood up in staff meetings, I've spoken to parents, I've spoken to students and gone, actually, we've got this wrong. We need to change it, and to be open and honest. Sometimes being honest with them and saying, actually, we're going to give this a go. I'm not sure it's going to work, but we'll try. I think it's also demonstrating, I hope, again, a warmth in your personality that comes across in conversation like we're having now, one-to-one, in a group situation, in a large presentation, and that people can see that personality across, trying to be the person that inside is key for me, not pretending to be somebody else.
Yeah. So what kind of leader would you say you are?
I think, if you're looking at the real textbook, I'd like to think I'm democratic, but I think there is a need sometimes to have an autocratic approach, because we do say, and I'm sure people would say to me that we are in a position sometimes where we have to make decisions that others don't like, but it's one of those places, education area of the world we live in, sometimes there are rules and things that just need to be put in place for one reason or another, and I'm not afraid to do that, because I think it is important in the same way, and you might be able to, I'm sure you could resonate with this one, there are sometimes some non-negotiables. I like to be able to give people freedom, but there will be 2 or 3 non-negotiables, because we need a standard there. And I think that is critical to the way that we continue to improve and reflect on our own practice. But there needs to be a certain standard, and obviously for me, one of the things I've done over the years is really focus on that concept of excellence. What do we mean by excellence? And then to be able to make sure that our definition of that is set by our non-negotiables.
It's interesting, the answer you gave there was democratic on one hand, but autocratic on another. They're almost bipolar compared to each other. So if you were a follower underneath you, how would you know which Julie Derrick you're dealing with?
I think that goes back to the honesty and very much that open door policy on the basis of, if ever anybody is not sure, being able to question without worry, to have that openness to make sure that there is clarity there. And I'd like to think that that is the case.
So have you ever worked with anyone that you thought, this person doesn't resonate with me as a leader?
Definitely, yeah. Without a doubt, I think we would be foolish if we think otherwise in the workplace. And I think that that's the most challenging part of leadership, is identifying, and I hate that phrase, but I will have to use it, people that are on the bus with you and people that are not, and being able to, again, have that conversation. Actually, it's just not working. And that might be me, it might be them. Sometimes you have to reflect and adapt your practices. But I think this sign of a good leader is somebody that absolutely recognises that not everybody can be like you, and that there needs to be a mix of people. And sometimes you're not necessarily going to, be best friends with them, but you can work in a professional way because you appreciate that they've got a skill set that links to the vision of that organisation. And that is a really important feature of what makes a successful organisation.
Yeah. So when it comes to disagreements with your leadership, you welcome it, but there are, I guess you said about the non-negotiables, they're where you will not flex, but other areas you will. And how do you go about making sure that the people below you are comfortable to come forward to you with ideas that are different to what you have portrayed previously?
I think that's making sure that you have really good, strong strategy focus, that everybody understands the vision. And part of that vision is to be able to, I suppose, have a good input into what that vision is going to look like, and to be able to welcome that. And I think it's also the ability to step aside, and those leaders that you're working with. So in a school perspective, as a head, you'll work with deputies and you'll work with assistant heads. I constantly say to all of my heads, as CEO, your biggest part of your job is to make sure that you've got your deputies that can step into your role at any time. So you've got to give them freedom to be able to lead and sometimes make mistakes, but very importantly, have all of those successes which, enable others around those individuals to gain confidence in them. So it is about trying to get the balance between the freedom and the openness to take risks. But again, just checking in the same way as I've spoken earlier on about having somebody that used to do that with me, but enabling that in your teams.
In terms of working in a school, I think there's another challenge that comes in that, in the sense that the talent pool is very restricted. If you're in another business sense, you might be able to draw from other places. In terms of teaching and then having your leadership team there, how have you faced that challenge in the sense that you've got a very finite talent pool that you can draw on to promote up to your team?
I think the concept of grow your own is absolutely essential, and without that, and I know obviously I did it in my leadership at Invicta, but we're now doing that very much as a trust. And again, I think you do that in the classroom. You spot individuals that have got a talent, and then you'll match them up with others, won't you, in your group work. And I think the same follows throughout, whether it's either in schools or the world of work. It's about spotting the talent and then nurturing that, but then making sure that you're sharing that best practice and then encouraging collaborative work with a view that all that work is developing their leadership skills and then enabling them. So that whole concept of grow your own really is key. And I mean, I see it time and time again on the basis of whether or not you've got some, a group of 4 or 5-5-year-olds working together. You'll spot that, there's a little bit of leadership there, or a little bit of talent which they can then sprinkle on others. And in the same way in the workplace, by pairing people up. And that's the beauty of my role, which is something I get such a buzz from, on the basis of talking to the heads and then talking to them about, the talented staff that they've got, and saying, well, actually, we could put a person with that person and, put them together, and then suddenly you get great things happen. And we're seeing that time and time again, whether or not it's colleagues working within the creative departments, such as music, or we're looking at sports and PE, you're looking at putting administrators together and then them coming up with ideas. But it's about creating that atmosphere whereby people feel comfortable to do that. And that goes back to that warmth, which I think is an important part of growing your own.
So in terms of growing, within the time that I've known you, I've seen the trust grow, and alongside that, your role and your progression from head teacher all the way up to where you are now, CEO. What challenges have you faced within that time of your progression, moving over from just a head teacher at Invicta through to CEO of the trust?
Well, that's a really difficult question, and I think COVID has been one of the biggest challenges, and I think the speed at which you need to change and continually update, and that's probably the hardest thing, because you know what needs to be done. Good leaders always want it done yesterday, but equally you're working with individuals that have got more than 1 or 2 things to juggle within their work, let alone their outside lives, and it's about trying to get the pace of that change right without making people wobble too much, but equally getting the balance between wanting to drive improvement and change forward without doing too much, but obviously the opposite of that is being complacent. And so it's really difficult, because complacency is where people fail. You look at any business, and it's where people have done the same old thing again. And I think a leader's always got to be looking at the next step, but it's got to know the timing of when that next step should be done. And that is really difficult, because you'll have some individuals that will run with it and fly and almost do it too quickly, and then you'll have others that just need to take their time. And it's again about bringing those people together to get it right, and that is a really big challenge. The other challenge, certainly for me, has been to get the infrastructure correct. So from a business perspective, which is what, the role of the CEO is, as much as it is about the standards in schools, it's about making sure that the HR systems are there. And it's a big undertaking when you're suddenly growing from, a small, a school, where you're holding on to everything, and then you're having to hand over everything and build something there, and you certainly can't do that on your own. You have to then suddenly think about it from a day-to-day operational point of view as well as a strategic point of view, and put it all together within quite tight boundaries, because financially you're restricted, but you know where it needs to get to, but you can't get there straight away.
I mean, you said earlier on that your aspirations originally was just teaching, and then you've progressed through, you became a head teacher, and then this last transition over to CEO has taken you even further away from the classroom, away from the students. What sort of challenges that brought for you personally in terms of, you said about letting go?
I think it's made me think about what type of CEO I want to be. And it's very difficult. You've got 9 schools, you've got a lot of students, you've got a lot of staff, and I want to be a CEO that's not tucked away. I think it's important, but by the very nature of what we have all been through with COVID, it's very hard to be very visual all the time. So, for example, this morning I've been out into the primary schools, and that's the best bit. Getting into the schools, seeing musical performances, seeing people come together, having meetings with groups rather than one-to-ones, often, and seeing that spark there. So I don't think that I will ever lose the need to make sure that you're constantly in contact with the practice that's happening in the classroom as CEO. I think if you ever forget that, I don't think that's the right CEO. Because ultimately you've always got to be thinking about what it is like to be a teacher in the classroom, what it's like to be a head teacher and the challenges they have, what it's like to be a cleaner or a midday meal supervisor. And as such, I think you need to make sure that you are very, very aware of what is happening operationally day to day, to make sure that that influences your strategic approach to everything. And I don't think a successful leader can be influential in their role unless they've really got an understanding of that. And I always liken that to, there are various programs, aren't there, like The Apprentice, and bringing my business side out here, Richard Branson, who will always at some point go back and spend a few days, whether or not it's Richard Branson on the aircraft and talking to people on there, be it the customers, be it the flight staff, and I think that's what a good leader will always do. I've read all of his books, and I'm afraid to say that I do quote him quite regularly.
I remember when I came to ask to take over as lead teacher of physics, and I quoted Richard Branson. So that was quite a subtle one. I didn't realise you're a big fan.
Yeah.
So in terms of you personally then, as your career has progressed, how have you found balancing that and all the extra demands that leadership does bring with it, with the home life?
I probably don't. I'm a bit of a workaholic. I find it very difficult to switch off, and even of a weekend, I'm guilty of always looking at my emails and ensuring that I'm on top of things. I think probably, people say VIAT runs through the veins of your body, and it does for me. It is something that I hold on to, even, so much so that, my family will know all about what's happening in not just one school, but all the schools now. They'll know, how excited I get about various things that happen. And that's the way I'd want it to be. I was exactly the same about my teaching. You always, that's the joy of being in education, isn't it? You've always got something to say about what's happened in your day. It's just been multiplied by 9 now because we've got 9 schools.
So your family must be very supportive then to be understanding of the fact that you are always switched on.
I do have a husband that I have to say, one is a teacher, which I do think helps. And 2, that is incredibly supportive. Yeah, I've got one daughter who says that she's never known into teaching for that reason, though.
Yeah. So, in terms of your career then, do you think maybe your interest has been kept in it because of the progression you've had? Or do you think if you were still a classroom teacher now, you would still be switched on as much as you are?
I think it's important to always have new challenges. And I think a good teacher would always have new challenges because they would bring the outside world in, and that's forever changing, into their teaching. They've always got new students, and therefore they've got to adapt. I think the most boring teachers are those that think that they've done a scheme of work and that they never change it. I used to change my scheme of work weekly, let alone yearly, because you just need to do that, and I think that's what keeps it fresh. And I think that that's no different in the way that I work now, or indeed how I've encouraged others to work. And I think that goes back to the continual improvement drive. I'd hate for us to be doing the same all the time. And I just think that that breeds complacency. And I think that's as a classroom practitioner, as a CEO, as a deputy head. But I equally think that, in no matter what world of work you're in, it'd be a boring world, wouldn't it?
Would you say that innovation then might be one of your non-negotiables? The need to continuously progress and move is a non-negotiable?
I think it is, but I think it's also with the need to reflect. And I think it's really, really important for self-reflection, for evaluation in everything that you do. And to be, going back to honesty, sometimes, in that evaluation there are things you don't like. And the conversations that you have with your team where somebody says, well, actually, no, I disagree with you, but you reflect upon it and think, well, okay, yeah, we're going to run with your idea rather than, my idea. We're going to make it our idea. And I think that whole concept of reflection is key, which again, goes back to good classroom practice, isn't it? A good classroom practitioner will reflect on every single lesson. And in the same way, I work with a chief operations officer and a chief financial officer in Richard Hayden, and we constantly, every day, what did you think about that? What could we do to be different? And I think that's why there's a good synergy in the way we work. I worked very well with Van Beale as my head of school in that way, because we were constantly doing that. And I think the more people do that, the easier that open, transparent, grow your own concept just breeds itself. It just snowballs because you're working in an atmosphere whereby people feel they can do that.
I remember when I came to interview at the school and sitting down with you on the other side, and you just had this air about you, this sort of calm but powerful manner. And I think that strong leadership is very important within a head teacher, but also as a CEO. So you never butted heads with either of them at all, really disagreed, had complete...
We did, definitely. And I think, but my style is not to have, full-blown arguments. It's to put my point across and to try to do that with conviction. And a level of authority, I think, is important. And sometimes you just have to agree to disagree, and it's done in that way. But every day is a new day, and I think that that's a very positive way of enabling good relationships, but enabling people to continue do the work that they've got to do. And ultimately, I've always said, who are we here for? We're here for, number one, our students and our children in the primaries, and number two, we're here for our staff. And it's very much like a customer service approach, isn't it? On the basis that you've got to aim to please and provide the best service you can, and that therefore, as leaders, you've got to make compromises, and you might not necessarily agree, as I didn't in some of those situations, but we would run with what we felt was best at the time.
So in terms of your career and how it's unfolded, you're now CEO of the Trust. Are you at a level where you aspire to be, or do you aspire to be any higher or go anywhere else?
Again, this links to the conversation we had earlier on. I don't have any further ambition, but if something were to be put to me or suggested to me, I would never say never. I love what I do. My only wish was that I probably wished I could have done it maybe 10 years ago, and I just think, oh my goodness, what could we have achieved? I'm very, very lucky. I work with a great team of people who are very like-minded, and I would love to be able to continue that longer. But equally, I know that there are other younger people than me that have got great ideas, and I need to give them room and space to do that as well.
Do you reckon that giving more room and space has come with age and wisdom?
Yeah, I think it has, actually. And I think that is something that once you've worked in that way and you see the benefits, then you see the need that your experience becomes that you're more of a facilitator and a guider, coach, if that's what you want to call it, than you are necessarily somebody that actually has all of the ideas. You're facilitating those ideas because, younger people got the energy and the ideas. You've only got to look at what's happening in the world of technology. It's fantastic, and we need to embrace that. I think that's really, really important. So I do think it's something that strong leadership should enable.
So I want to go back briefly to the last few years where you took a step back from Invicta. So that's quite a tough decision and a big decision. What was it like making that decision? Was there a trigger that told you this is the time to make that decision?
It was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. And again, I loved being head of Invicta. I think the trigger for me was COVID, if I'm going to be completely honest. And I know we could look at lots of people across education and indeed nationally, whereby it gave people time to reflect. It wasn't a reflection, I don't want this anymore. I think it was an insight into the huge responsibility of CEO, but equally to enable the trust to move in the direction it needed to do post-COVID. There needed to be separation, and I felt very confident that it was the right time to hand over Invicta into very capable hands of the team that I had grown. And, I talk about succession planning all the time. And if you were to ask any of my team, I had always wanted to grow them to be in a position whereby they were ready, and it seemed the right time to be able to do that. And I think post-COVID, the school needed something else as well. And so therefore it was right that I had a dedicated head teacher with slightly different ideas to do something that was going to be slightly different to enable the school to deal with the post-COVID challenges, but then equally to free me up to deal with the post-COVID challenges for the trust. We should underestimate that.
In terms of the stepping back and handing over, was it a band-aid removing or was it slow and easy?
I think it felt like it was a band-aid, but if I look back, I'd like to think that I was building up to that, and those close to me knew that. My two head of schools knew that that was the plan, and my leadership group were aware that changes were awry, and I therefore hope that it was a measured, I wouldn't say it was slow, it was measured, but then we made the announcement in the May for me to step away in the August, which was quite quick, but everybody that needed to know had already been well prepared for that. But it was a big wrench. It still is. There's not a day that I don't drive in and think about walking through the corridors and seeing the students, and I absolutely love it. I went into school last week and students are saying hello to me still, which is lovely, and how am I? But I know that won't last much longer, because time's flying by.
So you say you miss it. Do you, when you go back, do you feel a sense that things are different, or do you still feel like there's a continuity there, or is it somewhere in between?
I think it's a bit of both. I think things are different for the right reasons. I know that there's been a really big drive on looking at pedagogy and changing that for all the right reasons post-COVID. I still think the school has got a lot of what I hope is my legacy on the basis of everybody working together, the team spirit, that sense of excellence, the importance of the learning environment, and the general energy for providing opportunities and providing the best, which is really, really important to me.
So you've stepped away from Invicta. So that was your little baby that you grew all the way up, and you've passed it over, and you've got a legacy there, and you've seen that transition over. You've now got all the other schools to worry about. In terms of all of that, what takes most of your time and energy now?
Most of the time is keeping up to speed with what is happening and almost coaching individuals in their next steps with regard to their responsibilities. And then parallel to that, it's supporting them with the problem solving that needs to be done, because there's always something that will hit a member of staff or the leadership teams that they've got to deal with. And as we well know, all schools are on a cycle. They'll, be doing really, really well, and then something will come out of the blue and it will sort of knock them, and then it's a matter of, right, okay, how are we going to solve this problem, and then bring it up. And it's about supporting staff with that. A big part of our role at this level, be it CEO or Chief Operations Officer, Financial Officer, is dealing with the finances and managing that with the human resources and looking at the infrastructure to support all of the other good things that are happening, and then celebrating that success. It's really important to make sure that people feel valued and that we're investing in them.
So in terms of the long-term plan then for you individually, do you have any plans within the next 5 years within the trust? Have you got a succession plan in place for who will take over from you should you step back?
Yeah, there is a succession plan, one that I think will work. I believe very strongly that we are not a trust whereby we will have lots of executives who, nip into one school and say this is wrong or that's wrong and then walk away and never don't see the school for another 6 weeks. I believe in an executive structure whereby you've got 2 people working very closely together. So an example will be the executive head teacher structure, which then pulls the heads of school together, who will then be the future executive heads, and that executive head will hopefully be a future standards director or even future CEO. So that's the model that we've got. In the same way, we're pulling together subject leaders, etc., together, both in primary and secondary. From a trust perspective, I don't believe in big trusts. I think it's really important that a trust is of a size whereby you have a strong understanding of what's happening in those schools on a day-to-day basis, which goes back to that pragmatic approach. And I don't think you can do that if you've got a large trust. I think it's very, very difficult. I know some people do it very successfully. It's not something I would want to do. So our approach as a trust is to be about quality, not quantity. It's not to have too many schools. We've got 4 secondary schools, so they're big beasts, and 5 primary. And it's about making sure that we've got that balance. So a tipping point for me on a trust is 12 schools. I'd love to see primary schools, and I would like to see all through education, whereby you take the children from from nursery right the way through into their secondary education. But obviously the government and Kent need to think about that. But if we could do that, I see the benefits whereby we take children from Eastborough and they feed into the science and technology school and Valley Park, and the knowledge of those students and how that can be shared with the secondary, and indeed the buy-in from the parents and the children themselves, I think is a really very purposeful, successful model of a MAT. And I'd love to be able to see more of that across the board nationally. But I'm not an influencer in that way.
So that's interesting, actually. You're speaking about a vision that you still want to get to. So there is almost unfinished business still before you step away, it sounds like. Are there missing pieces then? You talked about nurseries. Are there other missing pieces in your model? Because you said 12, at the moment you're on 9, so there's space for 3.
Yeah, the missing pieces would be probably a few more primaries that link to our secondaries, and indeed nursery education. I think, and again, COVID's taught us a lot. Those little ones through COVID really, really struggled, and it opened my eyes as to the importance as to if we could work with parents and the nurseries with phonics and the importance of reading and language development, which really did impact through COVID, then we would have a really strong model. But likewise, I think it's really important at the other end of the spectrum for us to work closely and build strong relationships with college providers, universities, to make sure that which is a model that we've worked on at Invicta, to make sure that students' transition is really well supported. And I think that's the model. I'd love us to be able to not have our own university as such. That's really big blue sky thinking, because that will never happen. But to make sure that we've really got those strong links in the same way as strong links with the nursery and with the end.
So if we were to finish then with any advice that you would give to a leader just starting in their journey, what would your pieces of advice be?
My advice would be, number one, be you. Don't try to be something that you're not. Number two, to make sure that you're honest with yourself, but you're equally honest with those that you're working with. And number three, never ever count the hours that you work. And I think that that's a good leader again, because the day you're clock watching is the day that you shouldn't be doing that job. And I think that you've got to model that in everything that you do.
So you almost have to live as a leader rather than work as a leader.
I think so, and I'm sure a lot of people would criticise you for that, but I think your work is really an important part of your life. You're at work for many, many hours, and if you don't love it, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I think leadership is about that. And I've had so many conversations with people where they're, I've had to spend all night on that. Well, yeah, and hopefully you're saying, I've spent all night on that and I'm really proud of what I've done. But if you're thinking that it was a lot of hard work and was it worth it, then you're doing the wrong thing.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're more than welcome.
And until next time, remember, to lead requires us to continuously